We've known for a while now that the media can't get enough of Donald Trump, and that even when Trump is bashing the press, he revels in the attention. What we didn't know until this week is just how dramatic the results of that codependency are. Adam has more.
It's been a source of complaint and fascination for months. When Donald Trump says or does pretty much anything, the media is there to report it.
News programmers would line up to film Trump clipping his toenails if he allowed access to the spectacle, which he might.
Trump doesn't even have to go out on the road. He's piped into everyone's home.
But a new analysis drives home just how drastic the Trump effect has been. The tracking firm MediaQuant says Trump has received the equivalent of $1.9 billion of free media so far. Contrast that to Hillary Clinton in second place with about $750 million, and Bernie Sanders, who's gotten about $320 million. Sometimes Trump's coverage is sympathetic.
You're going to be provoked. Is restraint required?
And sometimes it's critical.
Trump's statement, even in this season of extremes, is a dangerous proposal.
But when it comes to Trump, it's worth asking whether there's really such a thing as negative coverage. Because even when the press pounces,
will you unequivocally condemn David Duke?
It only reinforces the idea that Trump is unique and not bound by political niceties, which, of course, is the same message that's poised to make him the Republican nominee.
You know, it was funny in this when I was reading that MediaQuant write-up analysis. They were talking about earned time. I'd never heard that phrase before. But the problem with it is, it makes it sound like it's deserved time. And as you say, you know, it's quantitative because it includes the positive and the negative.
Yeah.
But you know, somehow it all adds up to this earned time.
Well, that's just sort of one of those weird idiosyncrasies of politics in particular that they call this earned media. But he gets earned media like no one else has before or maybe ever will since. I'm really conflicted on this, I have to say. On the one hand, I think that you can make a really strong case that early on, when he was low down in the polls, the press overcovered Trump, that by calling him the Donald and treating him like sort of a wacky sideshow, we failed to do our jobs well. On the other hand, remember when he announced his campaign, he announced it with that now infamous comment about Mexico sending its criminals and drug dealers and rapists to the U.S., So right off the bat, we were covering this incendiary comment he made that a lot of people thought was deeply problematic, and that's been a theme throughout the campaign. When you have a guy who's saying things like this, I don't know that the press has the responsibility to not cover it. I think that some of the responsibility for Trump's rise has to go to people who heard that message and, you know, responded warmly to it, not just to the media. My 2 cents.
You know, I tend to agree with you, Adam. I think there has been some excesses. I do think the most important free media Trump received was for being a celebrity for the last 20 years. I think that has more to do with his rise than the way the news media has covered this. Let me give you an example of where I think that some of the complaints about overcoverage of Trump are misplaced. One of the election nights recently, not this past Tuesday, but one of them, he gave this very long, bizarre news conference where he brought out raw meat and wine and water. And the cable stations were getting an enormous amount of criticism for carrying all of this live. It was riveting. You didn't know what was going to happen next. It was very strange and disturbing in some ways, and I think that anybody would have been crazy to turn the camera off.
That's the thing. They're waiting for the next moment to happen. So that's why he's getting all this earned time.
Absolutely. And by the way, the term earned media has been around for a long time, but it's jargon. It's jargon used by the campaigns. I was surprised to see it used in this analysis.
Trump. Good. I was going to say, Trump has been shrewd in other ways. It's not just laying the stakes and the wine out there. There have been a couple of election nights now where his so-called victory speech, or what would be a victory speech, he's structured it as a press conference, which he tends to give the same lines and say the same things, but even in taking questions from the press, which is a really unusual thing in that context, it's giving people, news networks another reason not to turn away. I mean, he's being weirdly innovative in the way that he is, courting the attention of the news media. And, I don't think that it's up to news organizations to ignore that or to pretend that it's not happening.
But it is up to news organizations to curate material. So we have tools now where we could tape the whole thing and look at it and see if there's anything that we could put on later that was of interest for the, quote, press conference victory speech. You don't have to carry the whole thing. Now, maybe you stay with the steak thing because that's just so weird and over the top, and particularly for cable networks. But I think that there were decisions that could be made along the way in terms of what got covered by him. Every single moment the guy speaks does not have to be covered. So here's what's been happening. That's why he got to this number. He calls in, 5 other people respond to his calling in and play the call in 5 other times. Now, I'm sorry, he's not saying something so riveting each phone call that needs to be covered in that way. Sometimes, yes. But then I also think there's some follow-up there, and there's not enough, there hasn't been until recently, where reporters have really said, that's not a policy, okay? That's not a policy. What do you mean by that? Or, for example, Chris Wallace during the debate putting up the graphic. Okay, here's what happens if we add up what you say is your policy. That's covering him.
Or
All
saying
we're doing
you've claimed
now
that you
is
opposed
being
the Iraq War. Here's what you said.
Exactly.
You didn't oppose the Iraq War.
So as far as I'm concerned, for most of this earned income or earned media, what we've done has been broadcast media and print stenographers.
Carrying it live because you're waiting for the moment, and that's why they're not going to tape it because somebody else will carry it live, and they want to see the moment as it happens.
I think you can carry the stakes live. That's pure crazy. You don't know what's happening. Okay, but many other times, no, you don't have to carry the whole thing.
You're absolutely right about holding him to account, Callie, and I don't think we've had enough questioning of him about the violence at his rallies, the violence directed toward reporters. That, if he's going to get earned media, let him earn it.
Or I would throw in the violence alleged to have occurred at the hands of his campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, who Trump made a raft of appearances in the course of the last week, and somehow all the people interviewing him failed to ask about that. Which is huge oversight.
By the way, when I was covering the Dole-Clinton race in 1996, I was working for Fox News, and we offered each of them an hour of free airtime. They didn't want it.
Really?
I wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal, said, free airtime, you can't give it away. They didn't want it. Well, they ended up taking it, but it was a struggle.